If you guys know me and you know my channel, you'll know that when I comment on a crisis or news story of the moment, I try to do so in a way that produces a video that would still be interesting to me if I came back and watched it myself 5 years from now, when those fleeting circumstances had long been forgotten. The controversy and crisis of the moment is that YouTube has deleted the channel of Vegan Gains. And in deleting his channel, they have deprived him of his livelihood. He has been economically dependent on YouTube for many years, a dependency created by his success. My father said very few wise things to me when I was growing up, but I remember each and every one of them quite distinctly. I was once talking to my father. I was a really little kid. I was so young at that stage that I had never watched normal television. I had never watched a mainstream movie. My parents at that age only allowed me to watch 2 TV channels that had no advertising and that played a lot of educational programming, documentaries about owls in the forest and that kind of thing. And I said to my father, even though I was such a little kid, I had been thinking about becoming a comedian. But I've heard about this thing called advertising. Like, really, I'd heard about advertising on the schoolyard. Children were talking about some hilarious advertisement that was on TV at that time. They were laughing about some jokes made in advertisements. I said, don't you think that's a better way to earn a living? To do comedy, to be a comedian, but to work in advertising. My father's answer was, and this haunted me for at least many months when I was a little kid. I really thought about it. He said, well, I think that comedians have a necessary job. I think they perform an important social service because people need to laugh. And he said, I don't believe that advertising serves a positive social purpose. And he went on to say a few more things than that. If you guys watch this channel regularly, you will know my father was a left-wing extremist. Even within communism, he was a communist extremist. He was a radical compared to other radicals. So obviously his view of this, of who is a social parasite and who is not, was extreme also. But as a little kid, I then really looked around the world, and it was such a strange frame of reference, because I suddenly looked around the world, which, at that time still largely consists of the schoolyard and my teacher and the parents of my few friends, the friends I'd made at school. And I started asking myself, who here is doing a job that positively benefits society? And I had a father who was really teaching me. This was his sincere perspective. He really did think that comedians did something positive for society. He really did think that an actor performing Shakespeare was doing something positive for society. He believed in theater and the arts in that sense. It wasn't a narrowly utilitarian view of what you should do to serve society, nor a humanitarian view or charitable view or what have you. He really was not interested in getting out and helping the poor. He wasn't. Probably the aspect of Richard's act that I sympathize with the most is comedy. And you guys have seen me comment recently on the deletion of the YouTube channel by Mumkey Jones. Mumkey Jones is also a comedian. And if you've been watching this channel regularly, out of my last 10 videos, many of them have been comedy. Really, you guys may not see it this way, but I think that veganism as a movement is going through a very dark period. I think a lot of us need to be able to step back and take a laugh, have a laugh at ourselves, maybe reflect on what happened in the last 5 years, and look ahead to the next 5 years. And, I'm not saying we should only laugh at what's happened, but sure, I think there's a real need for comedy, sort of now more than ever, when veganism is at a low ebb, when veganism is at a kind of nadir, okay? With that having been said, I also do see people like Richard, people like Vegan Gains, as partly at fault, partly to blame for why veganism is at this nadir, okay? So I do sympathize with the role of the comedian, the role of the satirist, and the importance of comedy as a source of social criticism, reflection, and even just kind of part of people's emotional well-being, put it that way. And I think that people like Richard and even people like Monkey Jones, even comedians who do things that are very offensive and edgy or what have you, I think they can and do play an important role. And I've been tempted at different times in my life to go back to comedy, to do stand-up comedy, to like formally prepare and rehearse a script and do it on stage and then upload that to YouTube. Within the last 5 years, at several points, I've really seriously considered that. I remember discussing it with one of my professors, and I know it's unusual. He was a university professor who actually, his main career was being a comedy writer and including live stand-up comedy, acting and comedy. That was very much his background, so I wasn't discussing it with him for no reason. Richard eliminated himself, and, the size and success of your YouTube channel does not reflect the depth of your understanding of how YouTube works. Many of you were shocked when I came on here just a few weeks ago and I praised the website Patreon. But that praise was sincere. The way censorship works within Patreon is infinitely better than the way censorship works within YouTube or the way censorship works within Twitter. Twitter is probably the worst of these examples. In Twitter, you can have your whole account eliminated instantly just for using the wrong verb. If you quote a rap lyric on Twitter, that can result in your Twitter being deleted, and there is no human face-to-face process where you can say, hey, look, I was just quoting a rap lyric, or I was just joking around. The wrong word once can result in your Twitter account being deleted forever. Now, admittedly, most people do not earn money from their Twitter account, but still, it's scary. It's scary to know that's the line you have to walk on Twitter, and nobody explains it to you. Nobody gives you the list of forbidden words. Twitter could just pop up a warning, if you're going to post something that would violate their code. There's there's no seatbelt with Twitter, right? I have more experience than most people. I probably have more experience than the vast majority of successful YouTubers with YouTube threatening to delete my channel. So I know I am not remotely as successful as Richard in terms of the size of my audience, but put it this way, I have been targeted for deletion, for unfair. I've been flagged and reported and had to face complaints to an unbelievable extent. And if you look through the videos on this channel, you can guess to some extent why. But just one person, my ex-wife alone, her efforts to get this channel deleted, it's a lot. It's a lot to deal with. And the various people I've criticized, they all have fans. They've all come here trying to get this channel deleted. And the process within YouTube is very unfair and very arbitrary. And sometimes you get a notice where you have like 48 hours to reply, and there's no explanation of even what it is you're supposed to be explaining. I've faced these kinds of hostile and unreasonable threats. They're really kind of the same thing, no matter which heading they're under. I've faced threats from YouTube. Oh, again, it's indirectly, of course, this all comes from someone in the audience flagging what you've said, for copyright violation. But again, really, it's this kind of political censorship with copyright violation being the excuse. I have been accused of racism and hate speech, and I've had to counter that. I've mentioned that in the past. Videos in which I was criticizing a neo-Nazi for openly being where I was criticizing someone else for that, people flagged the video as if I were in support of the views that I was very clearly, harshly condemning, and YouTube didn't care. I was still punished as if I were the one guilty of hate speech. We've had a bizarre example of that just the last week with Anissian having one of his channels deleted. Anissian's a mainstream comedy YouTuber, but he got his channel deleted for hate speech, and he ultimately won on appeal. Basically, every excuse and pretext, but including harassment. I've had harassment complaints made against this channel. Now, very briefly, what YouTube will not explain to you is that they are part of the American tradition of jurisprudence. And in the American tradition, the reason why freedom of speech is protected, the reason for freedom of speech ultimately is political criticism and commentary. And that's why I get away with being as harsh as I am on YouTube. So I was at the gym and I was because I heard, my girlfriend told me while I was at the gym that Richard got deleted, I was going through my past criticisms of Freely and asking myself, did I ever really say anything harsh enough that I would get my channel deleted for it when I was criticizing Freely? And, you know, there are two things. One, listening to it, it's not that harsh. It's not that brutal. But two, the things I said that were so harsh were very much in the context of a political criticism. I was talking about vegan activism. I was talking about the political movement. I was talking about the politics of what's going on in veganism. And that is your shield with YouTube, is to say, hey, look, I'm doing something here that serves a legitimate political purpose, right? And that's see, this is like the positive definition of freedom of speech. That's what freedom of speech is for. That's what puts you outside of the area of harassment, right? So you can imagine if I criticize Sarah Palin is an now obscure American political leader. If I criticize Sarah Palin saying that she has no talent and she only got ahead in politics because of her appearance, that's very different from a high school student criticizing another high school student that way. And YouTube, they literally have to deal with that. Just teenagers who come on and say that, you know, some girl in their math class only got an A on the math test because she's good looking or something. So it's very strange. And YouTube, they're making the same mistake Twitter makes. They don't give you a seatbelt. They don't give you a warning. They don't give you clear rules. The rules are intentionally vague and obfuscatory. However, I did discuss this with Richard years ago when I had the threat that my channel would be deleted. I got a formal strike, or even, I forget if it was a series of strikes, maybe just one strike against the channel for quote-unquote bullying and harassment in a very mild video that you can still see on this channel against Ted Carr. But I was criticizing Ted Carr for his diet advice and for his philosophy of education and career, what he said about dropping out of school and not having a career, this kind of thing. And it was very harsh. I did criticize him very harshly. I assume it hurt his feelings. Now, from my perspective, that's legitimate freedom of speech for political reasons. But I see why it was that video, not my criticism of Freely, not my talking about future of the vegan movement politically. It was that video that I was punished for by YouTube as harassment. Here's the thing. Richard recently made a whole series of comments on this channel, say more than a dozen comments, that absolutely qualify as harassment and bullying by YouTube's definition. Now, I did not flag them. I did not complain. But they have that on file, right? And I don't know, maybe someone else flagged those comments, maybe someone alerted Richard to this, or maybe he just felt ashamed a couple days after you post them. But Richard took the time to come back and manually click on each one and delete each of the comments he made here to cover his tracks, if you like. Well, you know, YouTube, the comment, they'll still have a record of that. If you make a racist comment and then delete it, they still have a comment. They still have a record of that. The definition of harassment and bullying on YouTube, as soon as you're not engaged in legitimate political criticism, it's very, very tight. There is no doubt that Richard's channel could be deleted just for him coming on my channel and making vulgar, insulting, bullying, and harassing comments about my penis size. That's what he was doing, right? It was really immature. He was acting like a high school student. He was acting like a 12-year-old. Okay? Now, Richard knows this. Richard knows the rules of the games that we play here on YouTube. He knows exactly why his channel got deleted. I say this with the awareness, it's possible, it's really likely that YouTube will reinstate his channel. But when YouTube is looking at his record, I know he said things much, much more harsh and brutal and with threats of violence and this kind of thing. I know he said things both verbally on camera and in writing in YouTube comments. They'll have a list of hundreds and hundreds of comments that count as bullying and harassment by YouTube's definition. And those comments do not serve a legitimate political purpose. And coming back to my first point in this video, Richard, it's not funny. It's not comedy. So those are two justifications for for doing what we do here on YouTube. And Richard, you really messed up because you stepped outside the bounds of either one. And for that, I think unfairly, you have been eliminated.